The birth certificate is a financial instrument. Since the U.S. declared bankruptcy in 1933, all new money has had to be borrowed into existence. To facilitate this, states began issuing serial numbered, certificated warehouse receipts for births and marriages. These documents serve as pledges, collateralizing municipal bonds taken out with the Federal Reserve's banks. The phrase full faith and credit of the American people signifies their ability to labor and pay back this debt. To systematically manage and track its labor force, the government needed a standardized and methodical registry. Consequently, humans have been categorized as human resources, a classification evident in the nomenclature of corporate hiring departments, known as human resources, HR. Birth certificates are printed on security paper, complete with a unique red serial number. This number correlates with stock exchange listings, indicating the certificate's status as a tradable security, effectively making each individual an asset for international banking institutions. Historical precedents for valuing citizens as assets. The governmental practice of assigning a monetary value to its citizens began on July 14, 1862. President Abraham Lincoln introduced interest-bearing bonds as compensation for states that emancipated slaves, calculated on a per-head basis. This policy established a precedent for valuing citizens based on their potential labor contributions. The government, recognizing the limitations of tax revenue, devised a system to ensure economic control through financial dependency. By compelling Congress to overspend, the necessity arose to lien American labor and private property as collateral. A crucial component of this financial mechanism involves the birth certificate, which undergoes fraudulent conversion processes. Doctors, as state franchisees, are required to sign birth certificates and forward them to the Secretary of State. These certificates are subsequently copied and transmitted to the Department of Commerce and ultimately to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, in Brussels, Belgium. Governments worldwide leverage these documents as collateral to secure international loans. Birth certificates as securities on the international market. Birth certificates function as equity certificates that mature upon the individual's 18th birthday. Financial institutions monitor these instruments as performance units on the international debt market. The greater the number of certificates available, the more a government can borrow against them. In effect, nations secure their international debt by establishing financial claims over their citizens' persons and property. This massive-scale operation constitutes a fraudulent conversion of identity, as individuals are never informed of the lien placed upon them. This lack of disclosure renders the practice an unconscionable contract. The Sheppard-Towner Maternity Act and the Federal Birth Registry. The federal government's involvement in birth registration began with the Sheppard-Towner Maternity Act of 1921. Ostensibly introduced to reduce maternal and infant mortality, the act also created a federal birth registry, effectively rendering children federal children. Under the legal doctrine of parens patriae, the government asserts authority over children, treating them as state property. Public school enrollment and licensing requirements reinforce this structure, conditioning individuals to seek governmental permission for daily activities despite living in what is purportedly a free country. Prior to 1921, births, marriages, and deaths were recorded in family Bibles and accepted as official records. Although there is no federal law mandating birth registration, states have convinced citizens that a birth certificate is necessary to establish citizenship. Since 1933, Social Security numbers have also been assigned at birth, further integrating individuals into the financial system. The pledging of U.S. citizens to the Federal Reserve. The United States officially declared bankruptcy in 1933. In response, the governors of all 48 states at the time pledged the full faith and credit of their states, including the citizenry, as collateral for Federal Reserve loans. The legal basis for this arrangement is rooted in Article 4, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which mandates recognition of foreign judgments and legal instruments across state lines. Because the state asserts an interest in every child within its jurisdiction, it retains the power to nullify parental rights and appoint a guardian if deemed necessary. Each birth certificate represents a trust, and the child is the asset of that trust. Social Security numbers function as tracking mechanisms for these assets, reinforcing the notion that individuals are, in essence, owned by the state. The National Identification System and State Control. Today, individuals are classified as human resources, perceived as state property. The government is increasingly interested in tagging and tracking its citizens through national ID programs. Federal jurisdiction over personal identification, however, is constitutionally questionable. Despite the absence of federal mandates for identification cards, health IDs, and similar documents, government entities exploit public ignorance to implement new forms of taxation. Birth certificates serve as evidence that individuals are effectively national property of international banks. The birth certificate, therefore, represents a form of identity theft, transforming a freeborn child into a servant of the state. By affixing a national seal to a child's identity, the government strips them of their natural sovereignty and subjugates them under legal and financial constraints. The distinction between birth certificates and certified copies of live births. A significant legal distinction exists between a state-issued birth certificate and a certified copy of a live birth. The former is a government-issued document created to conform with federal vital statistics requirements, while the latter is an authenticated record attested to by witnesses. Prior to the 1860s, birth records were issued solely by churches and required the attestation of two Christian witnesses. This certification process was rooted in spiritual authority rather than state control. The 1828 Webster's Dictionary defines a certificate as a written declaration under hand or seal. A certificate is thus a legal instrument substantiating a privilege rather than a record of inherent rights. By contrast, a certified copy of a live birth testifies to the truth under oath before witnesses, independent of governmental oversight. This distinction underscores the transformation of birth records from religiously sanctioned affirmations of life to state-controlled instruments of financial and legal subjugation. Conclusion. The birth certificate has evolved from a simple record of birth into a sophisticated financial instrument leveraged by the government for international credit. This transformation has resulted in individuals being legally and financially bound to a system that treats them as human resources rather than sovereign beings. Recognizing this legal and financial entanglement is essential for those seeking to reclaim personal sovereignty and autonomy in an increasingly state-controlled world.